The Climate Initiative Group welcomes you to a panel, Climate Change, Priorities for Action, featuring speakers on national, state, and local levels. Part of our group's mission is to educate ourselves and the larger Newbury Court community on the climate change challenges we face and our potential actions. For the national level, on my right is Dr. Ellen Moyer, an environmental engineer, author of 3 books, speaker and blogger on resource protection, sustainability, and climate topics. She is a LEED accredited professional with a consulting practice called Green Environment, advising on pollution cleanup and designing green systems. Next, speaking on the state level is Robert L. Zimmerman, Jr., who has been one of the state's most prominent environmental advocates, a longtime member of the Massachusetts Massachusetts Water Resources Commission and Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection Fees and Programs Advisory Committee. He was for 3 decades, or 30 years rather, director of the Charles River Watershed Association. The local level is represented by Adelia Kay, who has been the Natural Resources Director for the town of Concord for the past decade. She advises the Natural Resources Commission and its subcommittees on conserving and protecting wetlands, natural resources, and agricultural lands in Concord. This includes the stewardship of 1,400 acres of town conservation land and maintaining agricultural agreements. Each speaker will have 15 minutes for a presentation, followed by 20 minutes of questions and comments from the audience. I now turn it over to Dr. Ellen Shea.
Yeah, Shay's good too.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about climate change solutions.
You'll have to speak louder. Hold it a lot closer.
Okay. So I'm an environmental engineer and I've worked for decades cleaning up contaminated soil and water. I got involved in climate change when people wanted to cut down our trees in western Massachusetts and burn them to generate electricity. And citizens fought like crazy for about 7 years to change the rules so that these plants couldn't go forward. And it showed me the power of individual citizens to create change. Now, 7 years or so after we had that victory, these guys are back at it, wanting to cut down our trees and burn them for heat now. So we have another fight on our hands. So it never ends fighting for the environment, just like it never ends to fight for democracy. So even in spite of the constant attacks, I'm very hopeful that we can solve our climate crisis, as well as all our other problems.
Ellen, may I suggest that the speakers stand so that we can all see you?
Thank you.
Is that all right?
I'm looking at my notes.
You want to use a stand?
And use it like an ice cream cone.
But you're kind of over right to your.
Yeah, no, I'm going to sit down. That's too much burden on me to do it that way. Sorry. Thank you for your support. So climate change has many causes, and accordingly, solving our climate crisis is going to take many solutions. There's no magic bullet, there's no one thing we can do, it's going to be a lot of things. And what's more, climate change is accompanied by a slew of other interrelated and equally dire problems, I'm afraid, concerning water, soil, air, plants, animals, our health and well-being, and our society. So we need to really do a major upgrade on our way of life. And solving climate change is one thing in there that we have to do. So I'm going to outline some top climate change priorities from 2 books. One is my book, Our Earth, Our Species, Ourselves, How to Thrive While Creating a Sustainable World. And I have some copies if you'd like to purchase one after the talk. I have a box of books over there. And then the other, and this book outlines how we can solve all the problems I alluded to, including climate change. The other book I'm going to draw from is Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown, in which he and a team of scientists quantified 100 solutions to climate change that are grouped into 7, what he calls sectors. So first, it's important to note that we all can participate in helping with this problem. We can help on our own, just in how we conduct our daily lifestyle, but we can also work in groups to make changes that'll help us get on the right track. And there are so many helpful actions of both kinds that we can choose from. We can each pick actions that we view as important and that we happen to be good at and enjoy doing. So we shouldn't feel like we have to do any particular things. There's a huge smorgasbord. And most important is to avoid perfectionism or thinking you have to do everything. You can't. None of us can. Just do some more and some more and some more. So we need to work on a lot of solutions simultaneously, and I advocate for a holistic approach to working on all our problems so we don't inadvertently fix one thing like the climate and then in the process accidentally ruin something else that we need essentially, such as our water supply. So with those opening comments, I want to talk about 5 climate change priorities on the national level. Number 1 is to adopt a can-do, will-do attitude. So that's committing to solving the problem and accepting that some people are not going to help. That's just the way it is, so we just need to move on from there. It also involves realizing we have to act now, not later. And we're the ones to do it because we're the ones who happen to be here. So we're stuck with the job. Tom Friedman recently wrote in the New York Times, for the environment, later will be too late. Later is officially over. So we need to get beyond the, I don't have enough information, I'm not sure. You know, we need to blow past that and start taking action. Now, though we have to act quickly, we need to be discerning and avoid recklessness. We need sound science and to implement actions in a green way, which means looking at all the ramifications of what we're going to do so we don't make a mess in another area of life. And most importantly, we need to avoid falling for, quote, greenwashing, whereby special interests cash in on the situation and make more damage. Because this is a money-making opportunity and people are going to come out of the woodwork and try to make money, which is fine if they do it in a safe and helpful way. Adopting a can-do, will-do attitude involves fostering a culture of hope instead of a culture of despair. The whole issue of climate change has been this gloom and doom scenario where people aren't talking about solutions. I don't know why it's so uniquely that way, but we need to get beyond the despair, because a culture of despair becomes a self-fulfilling cause of the decline that it foresees. And the opposite is true with hope. It can create an upward spiral of activity. Adopting a can-do, will-do attitude involves seeing our crisis as an opportunity for a major upgrade to our way of life. Perhaps to a society based on gratitude and conservation of the things that we like and need, rather than our current kind of greed-based, gimme, 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 throwaway society that's based on domination and contempt for nature. So adopting a can-do, will-do attitude means that we see the natural world as important to us as a man-made cathedral, for example. So we need more appreciation of nature if we're gonna really be motivated to take the action we need to take. So after right attitude, my number one climate change priority may surprise you, and that is we need to reclaim our democracy. Without a healthy democracy, special interests profiting from the status quo are going to stymie our efforts to fix climate change and our other problems. Special interests have ended up turning our democracy upside down, and we need to turn it right side up so that regulatory agencies protect citizens from special interests instead of protecting special interests from citizens. So voters select politicians instead of politicians selecting voters by gerrymandering, for example. And so that special interests don't elect politicians with unlimited and secret campaign contributions. We need free and fair elections, making it easier for people to vote instead of harder, and just common sense provisions like paper ballot backups. We need public land to be for the public, and we need it to be land, not waste sites. So we need to turn things back to the way they were originally intended and have us at the top, citizens, then government, then corporations. It's kind of upside down. Now, how do we reclaim our democracy? Well, we have to vote and elect good politicians. And then we need to write, call, and visit our politicians and our regulators. We need to get back in the game more actively. Once we have government of, for, and by the people, we'll be able to create a green economy with rules that reward helpful behavior instead of rewarding damaging behavior, which is in many cases what's happening now. Climate change priority 3 is to reform our food system. Now, I mentioned that Paul Hawken and his hundreds of scientists came up with 100 climate change solutions in 7 sectors. And then he ranked the ability of all those 100 solutions to help the climate. And he also aggregated it and ranked the sectors. Number 1 of the 7 sectors is food, surprisingly. So there are many food-related solutions that we can engage in. We can reduce food waste. Americans throw out 40% of all the food that we grow, all the way from the farm field to the consumer. And all that food is grown at an environmental cost, and energy that goes into creating the food. So if we just would be more conscious and try to reduce the amount of food we waste, that would be extremely helpful. If we would eat more plants and less animals, that would help the climate. If we ate more organically grown food and less industrially produced food that damages the climate, that would be helpful. We could eat more locally grown food. And we could employ regenerative agriculture. That's a way of growing food where we take the carbon dioxide out of the air and put it back into the soil and into the plants where it belongs, instead of in the atmosphere wrecking our climate. Now, since poor diet is the #1 risk factor of death worldwide, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We can reform our food system to help the climate, yes, but it can also help our health to be eating fewer pesticides and other neurotoxic chemicals and junk food. And so this is not a trade-off. This is a synergistic solution that helps everything that it touches. And the good thing about this climate change priority is that we can each participate multiple times a day just because we eat food. Climate change priority 4 is probably the one you're most familiar with, and that is stop burning things. This is the most familiar climate change solution. Paul Hawken ranks energy as the #2 sector with the potential for helping the climate. So we all know we need to stop burning fossil fuels. But what a lot of people don't know is that we also need to stop burning fuels derived from living things, like corn ethanol, like cutting trees and burning wood for energy. This is just as bad, if not worse, than burning fossil fuels. We also need to stop burning trash and other waste. The problem is that when we burn things, we take earthbound organic carbon and we convert it into inorganic carbon and then spew it into the atmosphere where it damages the climate in the form of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane. So we need our carbon back, we need our life back on the planet, not up in the air. Climate change priority 5 is to reform land use. Land use is Paul Hawken's #3 most important sector. We tend to think that greenhouse gases just come out of smokestacks and tailpipes, but the way we use the land has a huge effect on greenhouse gases and our climate. We release greenhouse gases when we abuse the land and surface water bodies. Around the world, including in the US and right here in Massachusetts, land is being deforested, cleared, and destroyed with catastrophic impacts on the climate and wildlife. Next month, an 8,000-page United Nations report is expected to be released that concludes that the rapid decline of the natural world is a crisis even bigger than climate change. So we need to change our ways by protecting and expanding forests, our coasts and wetlands and other areas. Nature, such as by plants, can take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into living things where it belongs. And by defending the living world, we can help the climate. So this is another twofer instead of a trade-off. So just to wrap up, I've touched on a few of the top priority areas for addressing climate change, and there are many more that I didn't have time to get to. We have a toolbox full of solutions, and they are ready to go. A few actions you could take even today that would help in the areas I mentioned are to have a climate-friendly dinner of organically grown food, mostly plants, or consciously reducing waste in all the different activities as we go about our day. You could call your senators and representatives and tell them that addressing climate change is of the utmost importance to you. You could join Elders Climate Action. Elders promote the vote, encouraging inactive environmental voters to vote. So there's just a lot that can be done. Climate change is up to us simply because we're the ones who happen to be here. And what's more, it can be enjoyable to make every day Earth Day. We absolutely can change the climate, I have no doubt whatsoever. The real question is, will we? That can't be predicted because it's a choice. We have freedom of choice, and I certainly hope we will, but that's what we're waiting to see. So thank you.
You mind if I stand up? You mind if I move around a little? I'm better when I move, I think. So my name is Bob Zimmerman. I was with the Charles River Watershed Association for 30 years. And one of the things I noticed when I first started, my dad was a chemist, so when I was a kid, I learned pretty quickly that if you wanted to find something out, you could set up a study and figure out what you needed to know. Anyway, I got in a lot of debates in the early 90s with the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority. You ever heard of them? Yes. Right? They built a $4 billion wastewater treatment plant called Deer Island on the Atlantic coast. It's 17 feet above sea level. And we were involved in a fairly confrontational debate over what are called combined sewer overflows, right? That's where the big pipe has both the storm drain and raw sewage from our homes headed out to Deer Island. And the problem is that when it rains, a pipe has a finite capacity. And in Boston and the 43 communities that depend on the MWRA to treat our wastewater, that capacity is overtopped when we get about 1.5 inches of rain. Okay? So you've got all this storm water and all this raw waste mixing together inside the sewer pipe, and if we didn't do something with it to relieve the pressure, it would back up into our homes. The engineers, they're clever guys, decided that this was not a great idea. Imagine. So what they did was they put what are called regulators into the pipe. So when the pipe got to about 70% capacity, they allowed the mixture of raw waste and stormwater to blow directly into the Charles River, to the tune of 1.78 billion gallons of that stuff every year on average. Okay. Anyway, I'm sitting in the audience when we're listening to the Environmental Protection Agency on one side, and the State Department of Environmental Protection and the MWRA on the other side, saying the Charles River has always been dirty. Always been dirty. And even if we were to discharge during these combined sewage events, drinking water to the Charles River, it still wouldn't meet standards, so why should we bother? So I was in the back of the room and I thought, wait a minute, let's go back to the initial assumption. The Charles River has always been dirty. I don't think so.
No, I used to swim in it.
Yeah, exactly right. So I started an analysis of the river. And on our first pass on the river, we proved that that statement was completely false. So one of the first things that I learned is that grand assumptions about the way the environment works without real, serious analysis are an enormous mistake. They're a great way to spend billions of dollars and not solve problems. Okay? With me so far? The second thing is that when we build stuff, right? In 1972, we passed the Clean Air and the Clean Water Acts because, it was time by 1972 to start thinking about the environment and the impacts that we had on it. So what we would do is we would develop a hospital in Newbury Court, or we would develop downtown Concord or downtown Boston. And in there someplace, when we were like 95% done with the design, we'd see if we could meet the environmental permitting required. Now, how much are we willing to change things when we just spent all of that money doing 95% of the design? And if your answer is 0, you'd be exactly right. So the second thing I learned is that we have to fundamentally change the way we think about development. That the environment has to come in first, not last. And we have to think about what was there prior. Part of this goes like this. The Earth's been around for 4.5 billion years. And for about 4 billion years of that, land and water have been working together. So in the grand scheme of things, with our 150 years of engineering, which organization, the Earth's land and water, or our public engineering, do you think got it right? Yeah, you'd be exactly right. The Earth did. So in all our efforts to build things, what we've made happen is that tributaries to rivers go away. We pave things over, right? So that the water from the sky doesn't ever meet the land. What it does is it gets collected in drains on the side of the road or the side of the parking lot. It goes into a storm drain, heavily polluted, and goes shunting out to the river, causing all kinds of bad things. Ever been in the Stop and Shop, in the middle of the summer, and you're walking across, and you gotta back up, and you're in your flip-flops, which when I was a kid we called go-aheads, because you can't back up in them. Okay, so you back up, and the flip-flop comes off, and you step on the pavement, and the pavement is hot! Right? And you get that flip-flop back on quickly. So when it rains on that parking lot, the heat gets transferred to the water. And as it rolls off the parking lot, because it rolls off the parking lot fairly quickly, it picks up a lot of fines, little pieces of dirt and phosphorus and things like that, and dumps into the river. Hot water can't carry as much oxygen as cold water. You start to change the habitat. As a consequence of our development, and the fact that in our development, we ignore the way nature wants and needs to work. Okay, I made little notes of myself just to make sure that I didn't miss anything really important here. Okay, so let's get to the climate change thing here a little bit. So there are 2 really important things on Earth to survive. The first is oxygen. Without it, within 3 minutes, you're not doing so good. Okay? The second is water. And after 72 hours without water, you're not doing so good. Okay? There are 7.5 billion of us living on the planet now, 7.3 billion, something like that. Water isn't doing so good. And neither is the atmosphere. We've been playing this game of using the Earth selfishly to feed us without thinking about how we can make the things that we depend on, in fact, enhance and restore nature. So my first principle for you all is that in whatever we do from now on, number 1, we have to restore nature. So when I was at CRWA, we spent a lot of time working on exactly this, and I had several rules about restoring nature. Number one, as we restored nature, we had to make money, because if we're going to change things rapidly, we can't do tax and spend. We actually have to earn revenue, right, to incentivize making the necessary changes. With me? Oh, that sounds like that's impossible. Want to bet? Here's how it goes. Remember the Deer Island wastewater treatment plant? Okay? You know how much water that treats every day? 300 million gallons. You know how much water it should treat every day? 150 million gallons. The other 150 million is groundwater through which the big sewer pipes pass, leaking into the system. Who knew? That's counterintuitive, right? Shouldn't the water inside the pipe leak out into the ground? Okay, think about it this way. You're a drop of water, you're in the ground, you're trying to move. You gotta go around all the ground. So you can only move a foot to a foot and a half a day in the ground. Inside the sewer pipe, how far can you move in a day? Tens of miles. The pressure inside the pipe is much lower than the pressure in the ground. So if there's a fissure, a leak in the pipe, and the pipe passes through water or underneath a tributary stream or a river, and they all do, that water leaks into the pipe to the tune in every major urban system in the nation, at least 50% of the water treated is otherwise potable water that belongs in the rivers and streams and wetlands on which nature relies. So we take 150 million gallons from central Massachusetts and throw it away every day. We throw it away every day into the Atlantic Ocean. And then we add to that 150 million gallons every day from the rivers and streams and groundwater throughout eastern Massachusetts, and we throw that away every day. Turns out this is not a wise idea. Think about it this way. You all know of the droughts in California, right? Did you know that the Central Valley in California is subsiding? That means dropping because of the groundwater pumping by as much as 5 inches every year. Think that might have some consequences? And yet, if you go along the Pacific coast and add up the numbers, we're throwing away tens of billions of gallons of water every day after we treat it. 23% of the total energy generated in California is used simply to pump water around. And the Colorado River hasn't made it to the Gulf in decades. Consequences. So we started looking at, well, how can you make money? And it turns out that, now you got to think about this like my dad would. He's the chemist, right? What's in wastewater? We all know what's in wastewater. But think about it like the chemist. And a chemist would look at you and he would say, organics and water. Well, it turns out you can make energy out of those organics. And it turns out you can reclaim the water. So CRWA developed a system of breaking up that huge wastewater system, centralized, 300 million gallons a day, into small 2 million, 3 million gallon units. Here in Concord, there are 90,000 people that live in Concord. How many people live in Concord? Any idea?
17,000.
17,000. Okay, so every 10,000 people make 1 million gallons of wastewater. So you got 2 million gallons of wastewater. You could take that 2 million gallons of wastewater, put it into one of our plants. The water would get separated in what's called a membrane bioreactor. And on the other side of the membrane bioreactor, you'd have drinking water. Now, you wouldn't drink it, but you'd use it for everything but bathing and drinking. You could wash clothes with it, you could do whatever. And then you take the organics and you mix them with food waste, and you put them in what's called an anaerobic digester. Anaerobic digesters have been around for 120 years. Who knew? And the little bugs in the anaerobic digester would eat the bad stuff in the wastewater and in the food waste and generate methane. And with the methane, you could power a generator or spin a turbine, and 2 million gallons a day would generate enough power to heat and cool with electricity 200 homes. You'd reduce greenhouse gas emissions because where that stuff is going, otherwise, it creates methane and CO2 as it disintegrates, and that all goes into the atmosphere. So let's see, I've got reclaimed water, I've got electricity. Oh, the water. The water itself, when it comes into a wastewater treatment plant, is hot, relatively speaking. Have y'all heard of geothermal energy? Okay. So geothermal energy pumps groundwater into what's called a heat pump in your home, and you expand it or contract it to heat or cool, right? That water comes in at 53 degrees Fahrenheit. Wastewater comes into a wastewater treatment plant at 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's twice the energy as it comes into the building available. And then, when you're running that generator to, I'm missing my head. She just said, hurry up. So I will. Anyway, you get the drift, right? So I have electricity for sale, I have reclaimed water for sale, I have thermal energy for sale. I'm taking food waste, which we spend 2 cents, 2.5 cents a wet pound to get rid of at the landfill, and now I'm turning it into something valuable. And in the process, I'm beginning to restore nature. With the reclaimed water, I can use a portion of that to restore natural hydrology in that particular sector. You with me? Yes. I'm making money. I'm not throwing water away. I'm reducing demand. I'm enhancing nature or restoring nature back to something like its old natural groundwater hydrology. There's a way out of the box, folks. And the biggest issue we face is inertia. Oh, geez, I've been getting it wrong for 150 years. Why would I change now? It's time to change. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Delia Kay, Natural Resources Director for the town, and I'm very grateful to be here and delighted at such a turnout. And I also feel like I am learning a lot from the two previous speakers. I have been a conservationist my whole life, and I feel like sustainability and climate action and natural resources protection are all very much interwoven together. I have a 13-year-old son who about 4 years ago was learning about climate change and what humans have been doing to the planet. And he was really, really overwhelmed, and it was important to me as a parent to really sort of remind him that, yes, we need to be aware and we have made some mistakes, but that we can make forward progress. Because I think that's true, and I might be an eternal optimist, but I do believe that we can continue to be aware and educate ourselves and make the difference that we need to make in order to save our planet from ourselves. So I thought I would just take a minute to start out explaining what a few of the things that Concord has done. I feel very fortunate to work in this community where natural resources protection and awareness around the environment and climate action is great. Concord has been working towards climate action for at least a decade, if not longer. The first Sustainable Energy Board was created in 2007 by the Select Board, and that has been revamped into the Climate Action Board. In 2011, the Select Board adopted 4 sustainability initiatives. Those were to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and reduce dependence on synthetic chemicals, and to reduce the encroachment upon nature. In 2012, through a citizen petition, many of you will recall Jean Hill, was able to ban plastic water bottles. That was adopted at town meeting. 2014, the town initiated a solar challenge, and currently there are over 300 homes in Concord that are powered by solar, making Concord #1 in communities that have a municipal light plant to have that solar generation. 2016, Concord bans plastic bags. So there have been a lot of steps that have been taken over the years. People are becoming more aware, and not only that, but they're taking actions to help future generations. The first electric school bus came on board in 2016, and climate change was incorporated into Concord's hazard mitigation plan, which is a plan that we develop with other communities to recognize what our potential hazards are, infrastructure, what could happen if we have extreme flooding, which bridges are likely to fail, what dams will go, where we can safely house people. So this is all developed into a hazard mitigation plan. And then in 2017, you will recall that town meeting approved very ambitious climate action mitigation goals. And those, excuse me, are very much aligned with the Paris Accord treaty. So that was a 25% reduction in town-wide greenhouse gas emissions, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2030, and 80% town-wide greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. And we are making progress. And I have, not enough, but I have a few flyers that I can pass out maybe afterwards that just sort of bullets some of the progress that has been made on some of these initiatives. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. For example, street lights around town. Concord Municipal Light has replaced out a number of those street lights with more efficient fixtures, and that has reduced energy use by 50%, which is remarkable. And these are small steps that everybody can do within their homes. I don't know anybody who has the incandescent bulbs anymore, but it wasn't that long ago that we were all burning incandescent bulbs, and now we've sort of migrated over to the much more energy efficient LEDs. Another improvement is on town and school buildings, through a lot of it through lighting and improved insulation. The reduction in energy use since 2011 has been 16%. So it's an improvement, and there's still steps that we need to take to get better, but it's encouraging to me that we can actually make progress as individuals and as a community. And then the sort of last thought about that is on town vehicles. We all have town vehicles that we need to do for my purposes, for conducting site visits, for wetlands permit applications, and then my summer crew has a work truck. My vehicle that I use for work is a hybrid and will soon be replaced with a fully electric vehicle. And then the work truck for the conservation crew is being refitted with an adaptation that will allow it to increase its fuel consumption or the mileage by 20%. So that's encouraging. And also in 2017, the town adopted or made the decision to hire a new position of sustainability director. And I believe that she has spoken to this group about some of the action goals. And she's a tremendous resource and is doing very, very good work across town in trying to find solutions to climate adaptations. Last year, she developed a municipal vulnerability plan along with members of the community and town departments. I should say that Natural Resources is one of several town departments that works on these sustainability and climate action initiatives. The Public Works Department, through their water and sewer, they're always looking to reduce water consumption. They look for low flow alternatives for toilets and for irrigation systems. The light plant is very active in trying to reduce energy consumption. So a lot of town departments are focusing on these efforts. And with this municipal vulnerability plan that Kate Hanley worked to develop, the most important priority that was identified in those workshops by the community was identifying and implementing low impact development practices. So for example, if you're building a new building, to make it as energy efficient as you can possibly make it, and that's, Ellen, you're a LEED certified professional, and that is using those principles. I'm sure Ellen can give you a lot more detail on those. But also things like if you have areas of pavement of impervious, those contribute so much, hot water and just the inability of water to be able to infiltrate, to recharge in our natural systems. So if there are alternatives where you don't need to have as much pavement as you might think in a development, or you can use other alternative approaches, such as a porous pavement that allows some of that water to actually recharge. And it's interesting, so there's a lot of concern that I hear, because we try to promote this with people who apply for wetlands permits through the Natural Resources Commission, and there's a lot of concern about the porous pavement in New England because of its, the concern about it being not possible with the snow that we get. The University of New Hampshire has done a lot of research into different products. There are a number of feasible applications that could be used and that are not subject to concerns with plowing or frost heaving. It's more expensive, that is true. The maintenance means you have to vacuum it rather than sweep it so that it doesn't collect a lot of these fine sediments that would clog it up. But an interesting benefit of it is that because it's allowing water to infiltrate, when you have a light snow, if you have just asphalt, the snow will just sit on top. But with the sun melting it, it actually still infiltrates through this driveway. So you have less plowing that you may need to do. So there's some real interesting possibilities with that. So there's still a lot of education that needs to happen around new initiatives such as that, but options are out there. With the municipal vulnerability plan completed, that put Concord in a position where we were able to apply for what is called the MVP Action Grant, so the Municipal Vulnerability Preparation Action Grant, which is just this year that Governor Baker authorized up to $5 million to be dedicated towards this, and only communities that have this MVP plan in place have been able to apply. And so we put in 3 applications into that we'll hear about by June 1st. The first of which is Kate is interested in developing a climate action plan. So we have all kinds of ideas about what we can be doing, and to be able to prioritize where those will best fit for the town is one of those grants. And so working with a consultant to help develop that plan. A second one, the Public Works Director put together to evaluate the feasibility of a tree nursery on town land. So to use that for, the town plants and maintains a lot of the street trees, and there's a cost associated with that if we could do that in-house. And also that reforestation, if it's in an open area, would also contribute to some carbon sequestration. And then the third one would be to replace, repave, reconstruct the roadway at the White Ponds boat access. The town was very generously gifted 18 acres of land at White Pond, including the beach facility. The state maintains that boat launch for required fisherman access, I should say angler access. And it's just a chute of runoff with pollutants that gets into White Pond. So we're hopeful that we can get one or all of those grants, and looking forward to continuing to move forward with climate action initiatives. One thing that I know I've got very little time left, but one thing that I wanted to just mention that my division is working on is pollinator meadows. It's a small piece of adaptation to climate mitigation, but we have way too much lawn. Even in Concord, there's way too much grass, and it uses fertilizer, it requires water, it is intensive, and it doesn't support any insect life whatsoever. So we're going to develop 2 pollinator meadows, one at Haywood Meadow and one at Barrettsville Farm, to take out what's there and plant native pollinator species, and have that as sort of educational examples, what people might be able to do with their front yards and backyards. And then just finally, to let people know about this Concord Sustainability Fair, which will be occurring on May 18th, and I have some flyers that I can hand around. But it's something where the Sustainable Energy Committee is getting together a number of speakers to provide information on sustainable landscaping alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, presenters. And now our audience has a chance to reply by asking questions and making comments, brief comments. And you can either direct it to one of the speakers individually, or if possible, something that they can all answer to. And Jesse's going to have the microphone, and please raise your hand.
In regard to food waste, what about the packaging that goes with it? Isn't this part of the problem? And what do we do about it?
Are you going to speak on the microphone?
We use this one up here. Yes, it is a big part of the problem, and if we eat less packaged food, we cut down on the environmental impact, and we also help our health. So really where we want to be going is to eat real, whole food that doesn't have packaging, doesn't have food labels, things that grow out of the ground, for example. So you're absolutely correct. All the packaging is a huge problem.
I wanted to ask Ms. Kay about the Resilience Committee. The town has authorized one, and could you explain the difference between sustainability and resilience, and how the resilience group, if it's already been formed, is working?
So I can speak a little bit to that. There's a Climate Action Advisory Board that is working closely with Kate Hanley, the Sustainability Director. And then there is the Sustainable Energy Committee, which is working more with energy specifics. That's as much information as I can give you on that. I can get you more information, but I'm not directly involved with either of those 2 committees.
Mr. Zimmerman, you talked about the fact that the Charles River was a filthy mess, and you explained that raw sewage and stormwater combined, they weren't supposed to, but they did, and flowed into the river. And then you explained that changes have been made that not only corrected this problem, several problems, and even made money. But what I at least didn't see totally clearly is what was in between. What did you actually do to make that? I mean, did you tear up the pipes? What did you do to make that change?
Wow, that's a good question. The first thing we did was get in a big fight.
Yeah, well, that one I understood.
The second thing we did was, CRWA is a very unique organization. It's one of the, I think it's the only watershed association in the United States that has science, engineering, land planning, landscape architecture capabilities. So what we started to do was do our own analysis and assessments. And in the big fight, we started to look at the pipes and how the pipes work. This was a completely unique idea. But one of the first things we did was to try to figure out where all the water came from that got in the pipes that caused the combined sewer overflows. What a genius activity. Nobody in the United States had ever done that before. Anyway, our solution ended up being what's called separation, select separation. We took the areas that contribute the greatest amount of water to those pipes when it rains and separated them, put in storm drains, and didn't allow the water to get to the sewer pipes. So we reduced that 1.78 billion gallons a year by 99.3% to about 7 million gallons a year. The Charles River is now considered the cleanest urban river in the country by the Environmental Protection Agency. So that's how we did it. Thanks for the question.
My question is also for you, Mr. Zimmerman, and that is that you flipped then from talking about the Mass Water Resource Authority as regional problems, and then you talked about how it's possible to convert wastewater to energy. What can we as individuals or citizens, how do we fit into that wastewater to energy conversion? And is this a business that needs dollar investments, or is this a government program that needs citizen support? What is the prior? How do we work to convert that into a priority?
That's another great question. The first quirk, we call these community water and energy resource centers. It took Julie and I 2.5 weeks to come up with that because CWERC is quirk. So we call these Hummers quirks. The first one in the United States will be built in Littleton. It goes, which is where I live, it goes to the town for funding. It's in design right now this fall. And I'm also working in Detroit and Flint, Michigan on introducing the concept there, because there the notion is, what if the neighborhood, a lot of neighborhoods out there are having a really difficult time paying for water. So the notion is, if the neighborhood owns the quirk and is generating then electricity, thermal energy, reclaimed water, reducing its demand for potable water, can it then subsidize itself such that the neighborhood can afford energy and water moving into the future, while it also restores natural hydrology? But the bottom line is that this very quickly will become a business. I can tell you right now that wastewater is a really bad investment. The Deer Island wastewater treatment plant, I'm sure you don't know, is currently gearing up to borrow $2.5 billion because that plant's useful lifespan ends in 2020. You probably recognize that 2020 is right around the corner, okay? The debt service on that facility doesn't run out until 2038. That's for the original construction. Now we're going to borrow $2.5 billion for a plant that will then last until about 2040, with the debt service lasting well into the 2050s. You get the drift here? This is a really bad investment. Yep. What we need to do is flip this. We can restore nature, we can benefit from the tremendous energy, and we can make money. I'm convinced that if I can get a couple of these Hummers built, you know, pretty much anywhere in the country, given the dollar pressure on the agencies that own the big systems, they're going to want to start to convert as well.
Thank you. What other part of your success was undoubtedly the very strong board that you had and the people that stepped up to the plate to support you in what you were doing.
CRWA has been sort of a unique organization for quite a while. The woman I replaced, Rita Barron, some of you may know her. She was executive director from 1973 to 1988, and she was a miracle. She was the first one that said, you know, the Charles had been written off for the better part of 150, 200 years. It was just a dumping ground. And she was the one that first began to convince people that we didn't need to accept that accepting that had huge consequences, not only for us, but for nature and for our future. I gotta tell you one little, I hope this isn't too long, shoot me if it is. She convinced in 1974 the Army Corps of Engineers to acquire 8,300 acres of wetlands on the Charles River in fee simple as flood storage. They were about to begin to build levees in the upper Charles, right? And the way she did it was she took the colonel on a canoe ride through Millis and Medfield, that area. And the colonel, as he's going along, somehow the idea occurs to him as he's looking at these vast wetlands, that he's looking at reservoirs. Those reservoirs, that 8,300 acres of wetland in big rainstorms holds 20 billion gallons of water. The total flow annually of the Charles is only 94 billion gallons of water. So a fifth of the annual flow can be stored in those wetlands. And they have protected downtown Boston and all the neighborhoods, or all the communities downstream ever since. So we built on that. It's been a lot of fun, I have to tell you.
Thank you, Jesse, for all your walking about. I've worked in the organic food industry for over 20 years, and I'm still working in it. And one of my concerns is organic. The company Monsanto that makes Roundup is everywhere in our farmlands, and it gets into our soil, it goes into our streams. How can we as individuals put a stop to this kind of disruption of our soil and water from a chemical? There's even lawsuits and people collecting money because they're getting so sick from working on farms that make this Roundup business.
Well, certainly eating certified organic is a big help, because certified organic food is not allowed to be deliberately tainted with Roundup. Now, you're always going to have a little that gets in there from the rain, the air, so there's no pristine anymore, but it's way better to eat organic. We can support our democracy and getting our regulatory agencies working for us again. Did you know that Michael Taylor, who was the food safety czar at one point in the Food and Drug Administration, was an executive from Monsanto? He captured that part of the agency, came in and ran it, then he went back out to industry to make hay on the new rules. So we need to get rid of that kind of corruption, and that is exactly what it is, corruption. And we need to support the lawsuits that are going on. There are thousands of people lined up wanting to sue Monsanto for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma primarily. And we're finding glyphosate in our kids, in almost everybody's body. There is glyphosate. They put glyphosate in vaccines, totally crazy. So it's the #1 used pesticide in the history of the world. And you know, we have to hold people accountable. Just changing the name from Monsanto to Bayer, that's not going to fool me. So a lot of it is public pressure on our politicians and regulators, and definitely voting and not giving up on the whole system. But I think the #1 thing is to eat organic, and that means everything. you know, if you buy a steak and it's not organic, it's full of Roundup
Well, it's full of.
and all kinds of other stuff.
Antibiotics and all of.
Yeah, you asked about glyphosate specifically, but yeah, we can't tolerate that kind of thing.
I just wanted to add something to that. I've seen that glyphosate map, and it's horrific. And it's a map of the United States that shows where glyphosate use is the highest. And as you can imagine, it's in the Midwest and in the Central Valley of California. And so in addition to eating organic, I would also encourage you to know where your food is coming from and to buy local whenever you can.
I was just gonna say, buy local from organic farmers. Yeah.
One more.
You're also wonderful. Does Newbury Court have a program?
Good for you.
Does Newbury Court have a program about what in particular?
Recycling.
About everything you're talking about.
Recycling.
I'll make a word or two about our climate initiative group. And I mentioned that we encourage educating ourselves and the community, but we also have some specific ways we're trying to develop good climate action habits and encouraging everything from saving water to recycling and saving electricity. There are quite a few ways. The ways you act as a consumer are very important. And if we are planning on having a guide that will give all this information in one place for residents, what I call the do's and don'ts of good climate behavior. That's a start. And we have a wonderful committee working on that now. We've had different committees doing certain things. We're going to be working on lobbying, I guess is the best word. And we align ourselves with certain groups that know all about what legislation is most important that we support. And that is mainly on the state level right now. And the session has just begun. And we haven't yet chosen what legislation we'll support. But there are things we can do on the local level and our own level, but some things have to come through the state. And so we feel it's our job to do some of the work for you and find out what they are, and then ask you to support them. And we do it in the committee, but we want everybody in Newbury Court to feel just as involved as we do. It's going to take all of us. There are a few other things we do, and we have had speakers, and we're planning more programs, but we would like your input on what you'd like to know more about. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you.
There are several other groups working that are pretty much partners. There's a new building services, advisory committee, I may not have that right, that's looking into energy and sustainability for Newbury Court. Debbie.
I would like to answer the questioner's comment as follows, but two specific suggestions of what Newbury Court residents can do, and I'm taking this first of all from what Ms. Moyers was said. One of Ms. Moyers' principal remedies was to pay attention to our food, and Ms. Moyer mentioned food waste and the extent to which that is harmful. And one of the ways that we can do that as an individual is simply order a half order of the meat or a half order of something else. And that would, if it's even reasonable that you're not going to eat the entire meal, just simply order a half order, and that would save Newbury Court food waste. And then in comment, I would like to comment on Ms. Kay's comments, and that is it was an extraordinary listing that you made of Concord's efforts for sustainability. And my suggestion of what we as individuals can do to sustain or support that is to vote for members of the Board of Selectmen who are supportive of those programs, and maybe attend meetings or forums to find out if they are supportive of those programs, because those wonderful Concord programs won't continue unless they have Board of Selectmen support. So we can vote locally to do that. So those are my two practical comments about what we as individuals can do.
Great. Are there any other suggestions about Newbury Court actions, things that we could do as individuals? I see somebody's hand up there.
How about composting? That's been a lot of discussion in the newspaper, and my daughter is big on composting, and the town of Marblehead picks up people's composting on trash day. And the town of Acton in the transfer station has those little bins that, you know, we used to have the hole in the ground. So I just wondered about composting. I know that over by the garden there is a compost, and I throw my coffee grounds and my eggshells over there.
Delia, can you answer that?
I wasn't sure if that was a question of the town.
No, just a comment, just something that Newbury Court can do, individuals can do.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Newbury Court has an initiative for composting, and I think that's a fabulous idea.
Well, we have a small compost area, 3 bins that were built by Bill Moyer, and I forget who else, but it's used mainly by the people that have the farm plots, and I take mine out even in the winter, but it wouldn't hold everybody's, and therefore I think we would have to work with management to have a larger area. But I'm a big compost lover, so I know it's a very good way. You can't put all food waste in there, but you can put all the organic materials, and there are a lot of different ways we can work on this food problem, and I think we really should look more closely as Newbury Court, but of course that's at the management level and it's not easy, but having our waste collected that different groups in Concord do. The high school has a very active food waste collection program, and I don't know, I think there's some private restaurants that have that collected as well. I think there are difficulties, but I think as the more we learn about climate action, a lot of the past reservations we used to have, too much work, too much this or that, but we might be able to accomplish it. Hope so.
Composting is something that's very complicated, requires a Board of Health inspection and kitchens and so forth, so it's complicated. The rules are very complicated. But one thing everybody could do, and it's so easy, is just to flip that electric light switch when you leave the room. How often do we go around seeing the light switches, the lights burning in these huge rooms that all it takes is a little switch, as well as in your apartments when you leave. That could save a lot.
We need somebody from management here.
Gordon?
Here, I was just saying that we need someone from management here, not to talk about it, but let's have them present.
A large percentage of the food I eat is bought by Newburyport. Do we have any say or control over the buying of the sources of the food which Newburyport buys?
Anybody here on the food committee, north and south?
Food committee.
Here,
No, that's a highly regulated and complicated thing. We have to know our suppliers, and we have to abide by rules and laws, and that's best left to our experts. Sanford Wong and Bob Herman are very good at this, and I keep on their backs all the time.
But it's not organic.
I know it's not organic, but you still got a problem with it.
I just want to mention that it's, you know, it's perfectly allowed by all the rules to put neurotoxins in our food. So there's a big problem there. And a lot of it is just awareness. So it wouldn't hurt to talk with the people who order the food here and just ask questions.
We talk to them every month.
About,
we'll do next Wednesday.
about organic.
Don't pay your bill next year.
How about every week?
So I just wanted, somebody said something about management being here, and I think it's important to know that Chris Centros did come to a meeting with the climate committee, what, about 3 weeks ago, Bobby?
Yes?
Yeah.
3 months,
and has-
months ago.
Well, recently.
Yeah.
And the committee has also written to management with questions and suggestions and so on and so forth. So there is conversation going on. And Bobby mentioned there is another committee on the greater use of the buildings and so on. So all of these committees are in contact with management. But I think the point's been made a couple of times that there are some limits on what management can do and what we can do, but there's certainly can work on an open channel. And one of the things that that I would hope is that we often hear people complain, but they don't seem to know where to take those complaints. And I know that Beth is always open to reading her emails and answering them, and she's the executive director. And Chris also does the same thing. He's not on campus all the time, but he does do that. And also, the various committees, the resident committees, also would welcome your input, as Bobby said, on what are you worried about, what are you thinking about, and so on.
As, they were invited to this meeting, and I'm sure it was just their schedule that was too busy. But we're going to be in more contact with them in the very near future concerning a letter that we wrote them.
I'd like to give a short history on that. About 10 years ago, the administration worked so hard on conservation of electricity that we were given a financial award of many thousands of dollars from the municipal light plant. We worked with them very closely, changing lighting in the garages. You'll all notice that after about 10:30 at night, those lights go off over your door shelves there. Don't need those lights all night long. Lots of changes in dining room lighting wherever we could. We put in different bulbs. Everybody demanded that incandescents stay in those beautiful hanging chandeliers, so that was not allowed to be changed, but it's changed now. I think administration has been good all along, working with Municipal Light Plant to work on these issues, and we will continue to do so.
I'm going to have to leave, unfortunately. This has been a very interesting conversation. I just want to say that Audrey Wallace is here from the Charles River Watershed Association. She's going to leave a sign-up sheet, which should allow you to get to CRWA, but also to Dalia and Ellen, so that the conversation can continue. Perhaps there's a way to have a conversation with the food processors here or buyers with Ellen in a way that would be helpful to get you to move. Maybe there's an opportunity for you. I'm sure there's a farmer's market in town through the summer that the Newbury Court community can take advantage of. There are a lot of things that you can do, but I have to leave you with one really important thing. You all vote, use your vote. We are in big trouble in this country because a lot of people didn't use their vote. Don't let that happen here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.